Hi everyone, thanks for joining me again. Today I wanted to talk about a topic that I certainly haven't brought up on this channel yet. I know I'm kind of early on in things, but I think it's really important to make this video as a kind of disclaimer for those of you who are eager to start an indoor garden, kind of what it might take, or even just trying to get a really nice healthy jump start on your spring season by starting your seeds indoors, maybe a little bit earlier than is recommended. So a couple of things that we've really struggled with as it turns, in terms of having an indoor garden and really starting a lot of things from seed very early in the season so that they're really mature when they're ready to go out in our zone. We are zone 5, 5B. I don't think we changed in the most recent update in November, but our last frost date is usually the middle of May. May 15th is a kind of a reasonable last frost date. And so I like to get a lot of things out and started in the basement early because we have a somewhat, shorter growing zone than others. And I really like to grow things like Lysianthus that take a really long time to grow and be healthy enough to put outside. So a couple of things that we've really been dealing with lately, and I'll show you some close-up shots of kind of the realities of having an indoor growing space, is bugs. So the two that we've really struggled with this year is fungus gnats and spider mites. Last year, the bane of our existence was thrips, and we really never quite got those under control. And so all of our seedlings, or a lot of our seedlings, were really small and somewhat unhealthy when we tried to get them out into the garden last year. This year, fungus gnats have been the bane of my existence. If I have one tip to give you off the bat, is put up sticky traps. Before you even see a single bug, put up a whole bunch of sticky traps, because prevention is the key. Don't be me and wait until it's a full-blown issue before you start putting up your sticky traps. And I had a few up, but I really wasn't good about switching them out or kind of adding as many as needed. So I just bought a huge, I prefer the sticky sheets, the ones you can get. They make them in like little designs, or you can even get the full sheets of them. But right now we just have these that you pull. Whoop. They're not the easiest to open. It's just one of the reasons why I like the sheets better, because you just peel off the sides of the sheet and then can attach it either to a little stand that goes in your plant, or you can tie it onto, say, your rack. But anyway, for demonstration purposes, I'll pull this out all the way to the end, and then I hang these up. Ooh, it's a little funky. I hang these guys up on my racks here. So I'm just gonna set this one to the side to kind of rest against my rack behind us. The other thing that I am going to try and be more diligent on is using mosquito bits. So typically what this recommends is for every gallon of water, you're gonna take 4 tablespoons of this stuff and soak it in water for about 30 minutes before watering your plants. This is a form of BT that your fungus gnat larva will feed off of, and it ends up killing the larva before they become full-blown fungus gnat flies, and will kind of cut down your population. So what I needed to be doing is that every watering day, or at least a couple of times a week, if not at least once a week, I needed to be doing this just to keep any residual fungus gnat larvae at bay. The tricky bit about growing inside, one of the many tricky bits, is you're bringing in soil, and oftentimes the soil has been sitting outside at garden centers, and these bugs are pretty resilient. They tend to go dormant in the winter. They don't always die off completely, and so when you're bringing that soil into your home, you just naturally increase your risk of having soil-borne pathogens or soil-borne insects in your home. And so you need to have a realistic expectation of how to manage those in a way that you think is most appropriate. I try to spray kind kind of chemicals as little as possible because it is in my home. We do live in this space, and I do have dogs, so I don't want to negatively impact their health either. So this is generally pretty easy to use and not super bad. If you touch it, you should wash your hands. I like to put it in these little organza bags to help hold on to all the bits, and then I'll just toss these and throw these baggies in the washing machine, so that way I can use them again for the next round. Otherwise, you can just toss the bits and let your bags dry. I will say I have accidentally forgotten a bag of bits in one of my watering jugs for maybe a couple of days, and it did turn into like fungus. So don't recommend you leaving them in your watering cans. So make sure you're switching those out after you use them. I wanted to add a little piece on the use of mosquito bits. You want to make sure if you're using tap water or kind of again from your sink, that you let that sit for 24 hours for the chlorine to off gas or kind of evaporate from your water before using the mosquito bits, because the chlorine will kind of kill the active ingredient that helps kill fungus gnat larvae. So that was my first mistake, was I immediately filled up my water jugs, put in the mosquito bits, and then saw no decrease in the amount of fungus gnats in the basement or kind of in my plants. And so please let your water sit for about 24 hours for that chlorine to evaporate in order for the mosquito bits to work effectively. So the biggest, number one, bugs. Bugs are really tough to manage. They can decimate your plants, and they show up in a couple of different ways. Again, fungus gnats have been our issue this year, and I will show you kind of some pictures of all the nasty sticky traps we have going on here, but this is certainly, this time of year, a big problem for us. One of the things you'll notice, my fungus gnats in the basement seem to really like my lisianthus, and that is frustrating because these guys are so hard to grow on and get healthy. So the first sign that I had some bug issues was this. My lisianthus were kind of sort of wilting. Let me see if I can make this focus. There we go. You can kind of see how sad these little leaves are. And then I looked at the top of the soil, and wouldn't you know it, there were little tiny clear white larvae, and that is a fungus gnat larva. And they, what I noticed first is this wilting. The next step, let me see if I can find an example here, is you're gonna start to see little bites out of the bottom of your leaves. So this is one that's pretty far gone, but look at that. That whole section of the leaf has been eaten. That is another sign that we have fungus gnat larvae wreaking havoc. So I will say that on my trays, there's maybe 1 or 2 of my lisianthus soil blocks that have been impacted, and are almost functioning as like a trap crop. So thankfully, I'm gonna show you a whole tray that this one was on. So you can kind of see here how healthy these are, with the exception of those few, let me see if I can get it to focus, at the very back here. So overall, I'm really happy with this tray, and if only a couple are affected, that's great. But the problem is, these guys are really mature. These are let's see, I started these at the end of October, beginning of November. So these are like 5 months old. These are really, and they were really healthy for a very long time before I started having this fungus gnat issue. So these kind of plants can take it. The problem is your baby seedlings that are still very, very new are going to be, can die pretty easily with fungus gnat larvae chewing on it. So I'm in a good position in that a lot of mine were a little bit older by the time I started having issues, but last year, you know, a lot of my seedlings didn't make it because of early bug damage while they were still very little and not strong enough to withstand the damage. So, for example, I'm going to show you this tray here. These guys, and I think you can just see a little fungus gnat deciding to fly away. These guys are younger. They're about think they're about a month younger than those other ones, and they are a little bit more stunted, and more of these I've had to just toss because they were basically eaten down to a stump and they were not coming back from that. So you really do need to stay on top of it for the sake of your babies, because they will not be able to manage it. So again, just to reiterate, a couple of things I do is the mosquito bits, the sticky traps, and then the last thing I do is airflow. I make sure to have a fan on all of my seedlings, and the fan is kind of 2- and 3-fold in terms of its function. The fan kind of helps keep the top of the soil dry, or at least helps your soil dry out a little bit more regularly, so you're not developing so much of that fungus in the top of the surface that really attracts those fungus gnats. And then 2, a funny one is kind of, they're not great flyers, they're small, so it blows them into the sticky traps, which is really great. So again, to recap, fungus gnats, sticky traps, mosquito bits, and airflow source, so a fan. Those are kind of the 3 major things I like to stay on top of, and even so, I am having a heck of a time getting these fungus gnats under control this year. So I've even bought, I can't remember the name, but like a blue light UV sticky trap basically that helps lure them. I've got those coming in on Monday, and I'm very, very hopeful that they help. They help in the fight against fungus gnats. And the other one is spider mites. So I had one of my eucalyptus plants come down with a terrible infestation of spider mites, and honestly I just tossed that plant. But now I've been dealing with other plants having similar issues, and I have been spraying those with a chemical. I really hate to do that, but it has been the only thing that has helped. The other thing I will do is I get a half-gallon spray bottle, and I put about a 1/4 cup of hydrogen peroxide in it, and I spray the leaves, I spray the soil. I'll sometimes do this with rubbing alcohol as well, because it helps, and you can get up underneath the leaves where they like to live, and it tends to take care of them as well. But the big thing is, once you have bugs, you're managing it on a day-to-day, or kind of at least every couple of days, because they hide everywhere. And no one round of spray or no one round of treatment is going to get rid of them all, and then they multiply. So, being on top of it and being proactive and using the soil treatments early and often with those mosquito bits, and really just making sure you have really good airflow is important. The other thing is that spider mites don't like wet soil. So the top, it's kind of, fungus gnats love wet soil because that's where the fungus grows, and spider mites hate wet soil. And so it's really tough because I bottom water everything, and so the soil top doesn't tend to become saturated. So when I started having a a spider mite issue, I started top watering some of my plants, especially my rose bushes down here, to try and mitigate those effects. So it's really tricky because sometimes one method works for one type of bug, but then it immediately impacts the growth of another bug if you have those in your basement. So, and this is not something that's abnormal for growers to grow outside. We have all kinds of pest pressures, but it's not really reasonable or feasible to have a trap crop in a basement. You just don't want bugs at all. And so you have to be much more diligent on kind of managing each type. So that's my little section on bugs. The other section is we have an unfinished basement and we don't have a water supply down here. So we are on a daily basis lugging 5 to 6 of these, including like small jugs, up and down the stairs every day. And so it's great for a workout, but if you don't have a water source where you have your grow space, you are going to be, getting extra steps in to get your water down to your grow space or wherever your grow space happens to be. And it's the same thing with outdoors. You have to have a water spigot, you have to have a hose, you have to have a way in which to get water to your plants, whether that's strip lines or again a hose. But when you're running up and down the stairs every day, that's it's more work. And so I love it. I think it's well worth the trips up and down the stairs. But if you have mobility issues, if you have a disability, if you don't have easy access to things, or if you have trouble lifting things, having a basement garden without a water source is another consideration. I have my mom, her partner, is gonna hopefully visit at some point, and he's a fantastic handyman, so we're hoping he can help put in a utility sink in our basement, and we're really excited for that reality. It's probably not going to happen this growing season, but maybe for next. The other thing is, it's going to be messy. I've got dirt, I've got mud, I've got it's disorganized. I mean, if you're remotely a clean freak, or very much don't like to have dirt on your floor, you're going to be doing a lot of cleaning. And to be frank, I do like a clean house. I don't like a ton of stuff all over the place, so I'm vacuuming pretty consistently down here, mopping, wiping up water that I inevitably spill because I am not always careful. And so that's a consideration too. If you don't have a space that you are okay with getting a little bit dirty, a little bit messy, then maybe indoor growing or kind of starting seeds indoors isn't necessarily right for you. But also, no one has to do it to the scale that I do. And so the scale of your mess directly corresponds to the scale of how much you're growing. And so I don't want to discourage anyone from doing this, because it's a ton of fun. It's super rewarding. Is it frustrating as hell when you've got bugs, or you've got fungus, or you've got dampening off and you can't quite figure out what's going on? Absolutely. But I think the benefits outweigh the cons. So to kind of recap, number one, most frustrating thing about growing indoors is the frickin' bugs, and being able to play whack-a-mole with those. Number two, water sources. How are you going to get water to your grow space? And then number three, it's cleaning. So you're going to be doing a whole lot more wiping down, cleaning up, and kind of organizing in this space that typically you'd have a set aside space outside. And then another thing that we have had to deal with more this season is electricity. So all of our lights are low watt LED lights. They're not super fancy high wattage grow lights, but we did have one. We had a 2,000 watt professional grade LED light that we had been gifted, or pardon me, like high quality grow light that we'd been gifted. And at one point our breakers just kept flipping in the basement and we could not figure it out. And thankfully we had a very nice electrician come out and kind of calculate all of our power usage on each of the circuits in our basement. And we had even paid extra to have extra circuits because we knew we would use this space to some capacity with a fair bit of electronics or kind of plugins. But we have 15 amp breakers, and we have we have 60 watts total, or 60 amps total, over 4 circuits in the basement. One of them is a sump pump, one of it is our water heater, and our furnace, and then the other 2 are for our outlets. That 2,000 watt grow light was maxing out an entire circuit. So that correlated to about 18 amps. So it was overdrawing the system from the minute it was plugged in. So it's actually kind of insane that it took as long as it did for the systems to start tripping. So we immediately unplugged that device, and when we spoke to the electrician, we kind of looked at all of the wattage totals on the rest of our lights in the basement, and we should have been totally fine. But one thing, if you know anything about breakers and electrical systems, is once they've tripped once, they're far more likely to trip again. And we've had more issues with our circuits tripping this year. And it's tough because you have plants that are on a certain light cycle and they prefer certain hours a day. And so if you're not down here checking it regularly, you may not know that all your lights are off. and we have our sump pump down here. We found out one day because we had no hot water. So we checked downstairs and the GFCI to our hot water tank had flipped. And so, making sure that when you purchase grow lights, you understand the capacity of your outlets and of your circuits for wherever you're growing is really, really important. So if you're not sure, and again, a lot of like the low watt LEDs that you get, the shop lights, things like that, they don't take a lot of pull, but if you have a ton of them, calculate your wattage because you want to make sure that you're not overloading your circuit. That causes heat in your walls. And unfortunately, if you don't have a good system that trips appropriately, it could cause a fire. So we really had a wake-up call with that, and it was necessary. We needed to keep an eye on things. And so again, recap: bugs, water source, electrical, and mess. So you've got to kind of be okay with some of those things, to do inside growing. And you know what? Try it. There's nothing wrong with trying it for a season or trying it on a small scale and seeing if it's something you enjoy enough to tolerate those other 4 things and that you have a good setup for all of those things. So again, I don't want to deter anyone from growing inside. We've had a particularly frustrating week with bugs, and I am in need of doing a cleanup down here. So this was just on my brain, and I wanted to make sure people understood the realities of kind of growing inside. The other thing is you're going to increase your humidity. And for us in Colorado, where it's so darn dry, it's helpful to have a space in your home that's a little bit more humid. It's great for my skin. It's a little bit easier to breathe down here. But the other thing is we're unfinished, and so we have a lot of, our insulation is just wrapped, and so you have to consider the moisture that you're introducing into your walls and the risk of mold. And so we know with how we do things down here, and just in general with the way our builder kind of insulated and wrapped our basement, it was not ideal. And so in a couple of years, we'll likely come through and replace the insulation and have it rewrapped and potentially sealed with something that's a little bit better than what they've done down here, because it's really not great. The other thing is, because it's usually really cold and dry outside, we end up getting a lot of condensation in our window wells that we're needing to wipe down and use a dehumidifier kind of near the windows, so that way we're not having moisture build up for long periods of time, and again can cause mold. So there are things you're going to need to be really on top of if you want to do this on this scale indoors. I personally think it's very much worth it. The other thing I'm looking into is kind of year after year, I suspect I will kind of scale down on some of the bigger plants that are in my basement. I have 6 rose bushes down here that are hardy to my zone. Those won't need to come back into the basement this fall. And so that'll actually clear up a fair bit of space kind of back there, and that I won't need to have inside. Am I kidding myself because I'm just going to order more dahlias to pre-sprout and take up that space? Absolutely. But for now, I'm going to say I'll have more space. But for now, guys, I'm going to insert some clips of kind of some of the realities of basement growing. I appreciate everyone joining me today, and kind of take all of this with a grain of salt. I think you should try it for yourself before you decide that's too much for you to be able to do these things. And again, start small and see how you like it. The other thing that I think can be very, very helpful is last year, our thrip issue, we couldn't find a spray, a treatment, anything to get rid of them. But what we did do is, once everything was planted outside, we did the most thorough cleaning of our basement. We wiped down all of the wrapping, we sanitized, disinfected, mopped, vacuumed, we did everything. And then we left nothing in the basement growing for at least 6 months or so during the outside growing period and before we started anything this last season. And again, the first thing I started was lozanthus because they take so long. So with that, we allowed any residual bugs to die off slightly, or kind of die off completely. There was nothing for them to feed on down here. And then, start over this year. and I'm gonna knock on wood, we have not had a single thrip issue. So I think next year, if I'm more diligent on treating with the mosquito bits, maintaining air supply, and maybe scaling back my watering a little bit so that my soil blocks aren't quite so damp, and a perfect place for bacteria and fungus to grow, then maybe the issue with fungus gnats will be less prevalent. But again, guys, thanks for joining, and appreciate you hanging out with me today. I hope you have a lovely weekend, and I'll see you next time. Bye.